All right, episode 20. We are in episode 20 of what I'm going to start calling just a web series, I guess. And it's, episode 20 of Live Small, Abridges, A History of Newfoundland by D.W. Prowse. 20 or 15 pages at a time every day or until the bars reopen. Still doing my best to keep on this 15-page a day thing. We're in episode 20, which is cool, which I think there's like maybe 300 pages left, so divide at 15 pages a day, that's only like 20 more episodes. We are halfway, folks, unless I bump it up to 20 just for the sake of ending this hellish fucking crusade I've set myself on. Okay. Starting from yesterday, the last thing going up yesterday, we talked about the final establishment of the Supreme Court of Judicature? The Supreme Court of Judicature of the island of Newfoundland. Is that a word? Ah, man. It's funny how things, like, even in just 100 years, language can change right over. I guess if you're looking at, like, how emojis are in the fucking dictionary now, that's probably says enough about that. Okay, so, getting into it. Immediately we find out that was okay. So once they established a permanent court system here on the island, like we had, like full-time courts and stuff like that. Now, of course, the first people to have problems with this was gonna be our merchants from Devonshire. Those guys who are just looking out for number one since day one, and now they're kind of like, okay, man, can we please, like, just, like, have a little bit of leeway? So, the establishment of a regular court meant probably a lot less bribing of officials on their part, and subsequently less money in their pockets. So nothing different on their part. They're still being the same jerks they've been the whole time. DW mentions that from here on in, we've preserved a lot of records since that establishment of the judiciary, judicial court or whatever. Records get a lot better, of course. We're doing a lot better at keeping track of things and stuff like that. Yeah, that should be fun. I hope to God he doesn't make us go through a lot of it. It just means that there's more to be found. I'm hoping what DW means is that now, at this point, I can just reference stuff and you guys can go fucking read it for yourselves. I'm hoping. Apparently the governor's required the Chief Justice to reside in the colony at the time, which is a nice change as opposed to just either appointing it to the first guy who comes over, or like someone who has no idea about the place or has no interest in the place, or is more thinking of, like, in terms of, like, the grand scheme of things as opposed to just the needs and requirements of the colony, right? So that's good. So we go through some names here. So we got Reeves to start. He's the first Chief Justice, and then we go to this guy, Dewes Coke. His name is D''EWES. Dewey's? That's not I don't know. Anyway, his last name was Coke. He settled in Trinity as a surgeon, kind of worked up and became some stuff. So even though he was a surgeon, Reeves himself, I forget his exact background, but he was something. Then in 1802, Jonathan Ogden took place as the acting Chief Justice. There's officer under Richard Hatt, noble officer. So anyway, there's there's a bunch of names, and it just goes on. And this changed all the time. And at the end of the page 360 here, it says, after 2 doctors and a collector, that's the last guys I mentioned, the next Chief Justice was a merchant, and his name was Thomas Tremlett. So, yeah, so what it was 2 doctors and a collector, or like a tax guy. Now this next Chief Justice is going to be of the merchant class, which, if you can imagine how things have gone so far, that could be sketchy, but apparently there was never a more independent, upright judge than Tremlett. His decisions gave great offense to his quondam friends in the trade, so the other merchants. The fact that he was there now and he was being real about it pissed off the other merchants. They made constant complaints against him. Finally, they embodied their grievances in a long, elaborate petition containing 3 specific charges of injustice. The governor, Admiral Duckworth, finished the old chief with the complaints against him. His reply was unique. I give it in full. So this is Thomas Tremlett's reply to the complaints against him. To the first charge, Your Excellency, I answer that this is a lie. To the second charge, I say that this is a damned lie. And to the third charge, that is a damned infernal lie. And Your Excellency, I have no more to say. Your Excellency's obstinate servant, Mr. Thomas Tremlett. That's all he said. They wrote a big, elaborate fucking essay, tear him down. He said, bullshit, bullshit, and severe bullshit. So, Anyway, so after that was all said and done, Tremlett was sustained in his position by both the governor and the authorities in England. So he fucking won, right? He was that honorable that the other guys couldn't fuck him over. It was, however, considered desirable that a man of more legal knowledge, makes sense, of more popular manners and unconnected with local interests should be appointed. His lordship was therefore transferred to Prince Edward Island, so he wasn't fired, he was transferred, lateral move. The choice next fell upon an eccentric Irish gentleman of good family, Caesar Colloch. Colloch? Some of the E's, it's faded in the book, so you can't tell if it's a C or an E, so let's say Collo. Collu? Anyway, he was Chief Justice of the So, Tremlett was the last of the unlearned, subsequently the head, so they call them the unlearned because they weren't law people. Subsequently, the head of the Supreme Court was a barrister of no less than 7 years standing. So, now to get that job, you needed 7 years standing as a barrister to be the Chief Justice, which makes good sense to me. Then we have a note here that says Vice Admiral John Campbell was governor from 1782 to 1785. He appears to have been an able and enlightened ruler. If DW is saying he appears to have been an able and enlightened, there can't be that much information on him, and I guess things went pretty good. So after Tremlett, they made sure to put, had seven years experience. John Campbell was in after him on page 362. I just read that to you about him being an enlightened ruler. Cool. So Campbell, so by enlightened, actually, he lets the Catholics build a church in St. John's. So yay, progress. Think about how interesting things are when letting a Catholic church be built somewhere was considered progress. And whether the Catholic Church actually knows what the word progress even means. So that's interesting to consider, the fact that it was considered progressive to let a Catholic church be built in St. John's. That was done. They called the building, so the first bishop of the church here, of the Catholic Church, I guess the island was this fellow Bishop O'Donnell. I don't know if that's where the high school name came from. He's our first guy in charge of that one. He was known as a very devout but very caring man. Apparently he won over a pile of hearts, and this was all while being up against, the prejudice of Protestants at the time, because even though the governor, fucking Campbell, because Campbell was cool with it, doesn't mean everybody else was. So, he was up against a bit of that in the community and stuff, but he did win people over, so between the Protestants and the old fishing admirals and stuff at the time, like, other merchants and people were still pushing against it, because this is another authority in the community and stuff like that, right? But apparently, so, despite him having a bit of an uphill battle, he brought peace, order, and tranquility to the people that in his congregation, not teaching them not just to be good Christians, but as well to be good citizens. So I suppose to go beyond just, sort of the do unto others part, which really is all that Catholicism, or fucking Christianity for that matter, should be. But that's, you're not here to listen to me vent on what should and shouldn't be. Anyway, so on page 364, we hear a little bit more about him. Okay, so the patriotic services of Bishop O'Donnell at the particular crisis of the French Revolution, this French Revolution, so this is where we are at in time now. The French is about to go off. When rebellion and anarchy were rampant, his episcopal service in putting an end to the conspiracy amongst the soldiers in the United Irishmen to murder the whole population of St. John's. So at one point, there was a whole conspiracy to have everyone in St. John's slaughtered, which we don't really get into in this book, but actually we do. It just says, see the letter of this subject from Chief Justice Ogden to Governor Waldegrave in the appendix, page 418. Yeah, I'll try and remember that as best I can. So the whole population of St. John's were to be wiped out. The dangers he voluntarily encountered, the secret influence his deep religious fever exercised over these poor ignorant dupes are only known to the omnipotent. Other such obligations, we can wonder that Protestant vied with Catholic to do him honor. So he was so good that he could tie the bonds between Protestant and Catholic, is basically what they're saying. And to show their love for one who, with Conall Skerritt under Providence, had been the savior of their lives, I guess. I don't know what that means. But, in recognition, it also says, in recognition of his loyal conduct, he had a pension from the crown of £50 a year. It was obtained after much petitioning and persistent application by the governors, especially Waldegrave. So these guys were like, give this man a fucking pension. He's done wonders. Everyone must agree with Bishop Malloch that he was very poorly rewarded. A friendship existed not only amongst the Catholic and the Protestant laity, 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 but also between Father Yor and the Church of England minister Parson Dingle, which Parson Dingle is the funniest name to show up so far. Like, how can anyone take you seriously? So this is pretty good period for religion on the island, I guess. Bishop O'Donnell was a good fella. So what else have we got here? Page 364, yada yada yada. Just a note. Because Bishop O'Donnell was a cool guy doesn't mean that all the priests were cool guys or are still cool guys. But no, it doesn't mean that everything was perfect or whatever. Separate congregations, there were priests who thought that in my harbor, my congregation, it's my thing, as opposed to having a general rule from like the Vatican or whatever in there. So things weren't perfect, but by and large, O'Donnell was a good guy and did some good things for the island. So I just read the word Ireland because what we have now happening, now that there's an establishment of a proper Catholic Church here on the island, now we get the Irish starting to come over, which is good because when the Irish came over, I'm just going to read this quote first to make sure I don't run over myself. The toleration, or what we would say tolerance nowadays, the tolerance shown to the Roman Catholic Church had great influence on the permanent settlement of the colony. The country boys who came out from Ireland were full of the earth's hunger which distinguishes their race. They cherished the little spots of land they cleared and cultivated. The best farms around the capital are the work of either West Countrymen or Irishmen. To these two classes of settlers we owe good cultivation and picturesque homesteads around St. John's and Conception Bay. So you can see what's starting to happen out here. Now the permanent church here also gives the Irish people more incentive to come here, stay here. They were excellent farmers. So now they're tilling the land, sort of starting farms and creating, again, a more permanent basis. So if they're farming, they're growing stuff. We don't have to be getting so much of our stuff from England or from America or from Bermuda or from, I don't know where else we're getting stuff from these days. I don't know, the Dutch. Are we still at war with the Dutch? No. Okay, perfect. So that's good. And I like it here. So that's nice. DW takes a little jump here and he says, and I like this, he says, "It is impossible in a history of this character to give details about the various administrations of the 23 governors who ruled the island during the long reign of George III. Again, George III's reign was only about 60 years. So we're looking at more, or just about every 2 years, we have a completely new governor of the island who may have a completely different background, who may not have any fucking idea what he's doing. Oh my god, it's the same thing that's happening right now." Does that not fuck with anybody else? Okay. I'm getting off track. Okay, so there were two things that happened. DW says, I want to go through the history of the 23 governors that went through King George III's reign. And he says there was only really two important things that happened during King George's reign in terms of the island, which, I don't know, doesn't make much sense to me, because I thought for sure I'd spent the last fucking 5 episodes going through things that have happened during King George III's reign, but I don't know, here we are. Anyway, the only two that were a bit important, which we haven't touched on yet, we had the arrival of Prince William Henry. He shows up at the island and spends a little bit of time here. And this Prince William Henry comes here. Oh, and the last attack of the French on the island. So before you get that exciting second part, the first part is His Royal Highness, in accordance with the naval rule of the day, was appointed surrogate by his commanding officer, Governor Elliot. In his letters to the governor, the prince appears as an attentive, careful subordinate, most respectful towards his superior officer. Later on, we have a very animated and lengthy correspondence. Not going at it. So some people thought, I don't know, there was a bit of pushback. He maintained. He wasn't a model prince, they say, but he was very good-natured and a good friend of the colony, more importantly. He ordered the building of the English church in Placentia, because Placentia, all French before us today, were Catholic. Now we're building English churches in Placentia. We're building Catholic churches in St. John's, right? So, and he contributed handsomely to its erection and furnished the massive communion service long in the custody of Dr. Bradshaw's family at Placentia. He gave a commission to one of the Collins family, who afterwards became a lieutenant. So he was putting some money into the place. He was really helping. He seemed to be a friend of the colony or whatever. There's a few little anecdotes there about the prince being on the island, his time he was here, meeting and befriending people in and around Placentia. Remember that anecdote I told you in the last one where someone was saying, like, remember the boys were being, the admirals or the justice was being really unfair, and we were saying the only guy to ever get one over on the merchants was this fella who actually petitioned Prince Henry about this. So that was one of the, he was benevolent. I guess he was a good, he knew his power and he wielded it in the right way. There's just stories there about a couple people, like, being able to go down and smoke a pipe with him. Like, he just seemed like a fairly straightforward guy. I guess the military service had turned him into more of an actual human being as opposed to just some royal to be paraded around the streets. I guess that's it for one of the biggest events in the last 50 to fucking 60 years we've been talking about, despite all the wars and such. Okay, so on page 367, I have here, okay, the great and ominous events of the year 1789. The outbreak of the French Revolution, followed by the murders of Louis the 16th and Marie Antoinette in 1763. You can call them murders, like you can call them justified executions, whatever. Anyway, and again, all this kerfuffle brought on a war between England and France. Again, on the 14th of May, our governor, Vice Admiral King, not to be confused with Vice Admiral to the King, his last name was King, we got a few of them here. Vice Admiral, I can't say Admiral for the life of me. Vice Admiral King took possession of St. Pierre. A far more memorable event than even this was the arrival of His Royal Highness, is the last attack of the French on the colony under Admiral Richery in 1796. The story is told in the colonial records, but is more graphically described by an eyewitness quoted by the Reverend P. Toke. Some Mr. George Hutchings, grandfather of the present Mr. George A. Hutchings, who I imagine is no longer with us, rendered valuable service to the colony by reconnoitering the movements of the invading fleet. He was especially distinguished by the governor for his patriotic conduct. So he was spying. The guy was spying and he was watching the French. So what we've got now is another attack by the French. Are you fucking serious? How has it gone over so far? Like, what is gonna happen here? So it just says, in 1795, it has been stated that the Nova Scotia Regiment was chiefly formed of old refugee soldiers from the American Army, many of whom were well-disciplined non-commissioned officers, and were of great service in drilling and forming the young recruits of the Royal Newfoundland Regiment. It was astonishing how soon the latter became fit for duty. That'd be us. When this service was performed, the Nova Scotia Regiment were ordered back to Halifax. In the meantime, some buildings were erected at Signal Hill, and the first blockhouse commenced. Look up blockhouse for me. There being no carriage road to Signal Hill, all the guns required for the hill were taken by men of the garrison and parbuckled, which I assume means fucking gruntly hogged up by fucking your own hands and feet and your heartbeat, dragged them up the face of the rock at Crow's Nest, and thence to the respective batteries, a most laborious and dangerous service. Oh, maybe they actually dragged all the guns up the rock face. Yeah, that'd be a bit more dangerous. She's a bit steeper going up that way. Anyway, so we're starting to man the garrisons now because the French are on the go. We've heard about some movements and stuff like that. It goes on. In 1796, the levy of the Royal Newfoundland Regiment had been completed the preceding fall, and it was found that the barracks at Fort Townsend and Fort William were insufficient to contain so many men. It was therefore ordered that the garrison should go under canvas for a few months while the old barracks were being repaired and cleansed, blah, 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 blah. Finished, so, the improved defenses of the Narrows being finished, some experiments were tried with heated shot before His Excellency Admiral Sir James Wallace, the governor, which gave general satisfaction. So we beefed up the defenses and the guns. We showed it to the general, and he was like, good job. End the fucking story. So the French are on the way. That's usually not a good sign. So on page, 370, I just have, so the signal was made for the enemy's fleet. So they knew that the French were coming. His Excellency Sir James Wallace, governor of warlike celebrity, immediately proclaimed martial law and ordered all the men in the town fit for service, basically called a draft for anybody who couldn't. Merchants with their domestic and wharf establishments, captains of vessels with their crews, planters with their fishermen and sharemen to muster in front of a camp where they were enrolled and told off to the forts and batteries, and they were not to be dismissed until the governor's pleasure was known. So get the fuck out there, boys. We're going to war. It says here, the enemy stood off on the near Cape Spear all that day during the night. And during the night, the road was open from Maggoty Cove Bridge through the enclosures leading to Signal Hill by direction of the governor in order to expedite the transport of munitions, stores, and provisions to Signal Hill, as well as the camp equipage, which had been struck in the evening. And by daylight in the morning of the 2nd, by the tents were pitched to the summit of the hill from the Duke of York's battery to Cockhold Head, and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so basically, the guys manned the shit out of Signal Hill, and they did such a good job that it was pretty intimidating. And after like 6 days, the French Legion or Armada or whatever, the attacking force of the French turned about and left. They went on the third. The enemy formed a line and stood for the Narrows. When it was expected their intention was to attempt a landing, they stood on until van ships came within the extreme range of the guns of Fort Amherst, when she and all of them put about and stood out to sea. They remained in sight for several days, and at last bore away to the southward and arrived at Bay Bulls, where they landed, and to consummate their dastardly conduct, they drove the poor defenseless inhabitants to the woods. In the words of the local poet of the southern shore, burnt their stores and houses, took their fish and oil, the hard-earned produce of their yearly toil. So they got poetically fucked over down in Bay Bulls. On the 8th, they unmoored and left. Their further exploits were to destroy... We're talking about the French. Their further exploits were to destroy what remained of St. Pierre, which was in possession of the English at the time. They also burnt some fishing rooms in the Straits of Belle Isle in Bay Bulls. The French captured a couple of merchant vessels and Mr. Dingle, the magistrate. I mean, come on. One captain was brought on board the Admiral Richard's flagship, the Jupiter. When asked about the strength of St. John's, he lied like an ambassador for the good of his country and said there were 5,000 troops in St. John's, that they could not enter St. John's on account of the boom and chain, and that 200 guns would play on them if they came in. The French seemed to doubt that number of troops, but on boldly repeating his statement, the Admiral gave up the idea of attacking the town, so Buddy lied through his teeth until he got the job done. Good on you, man. Okay, now we're going to talk briefly about Honorable William Waldegrave. So that's cool. That was the Battle of the French. That was their presence here. I don't know if we're getting more into that in a second, but they didn't take St. John's. They fucked up Bay Bulls a bit. The Honorable William Waldegrave, the last naval governor in the 18th century, 1797, 98, and 99, was son of Earl of Waldegrave. No administrator in the colony, with the exception of Palliser, did more for the island, so I guess that's of note. He had greatly distinguished himself as a dashing captain of a frigate and an admiral. The period of his government was a very troubled one. The mutiny of the Nore extending even to Newfoundland. What else we got here? A rebellion broke out on board the HMS Latona and was only quelled by the officers drawing their swords. There's a bit of shit that went on. It wasn't his fault. It was just troubled times. It says here, I don't know if they're talking about him, but they say, the fire-eating sailor who made his address most sincerely religious and in private life, the kindest and most benevolent of men, he looked carefully after the food and comfort of his soldiers and sailors, organized a society for the relief of the poor in St. John's, and with all his life he was a permanent subscriber of a £20 annuity to this fund. It was mainly through his exertions that the old Anglican Church in St. John's was thoroughly repaired and improved. It had fallen into such a dilapidated condition that it could not be used, and divine service had to be held every Sunday in the courthouse. Through Waldegrave's active exertions of over £1,500 was obtained from the king and the Society for Propagation of the Gospel at his private friend. Religious guy, apparently, did a lot for the community on top of being a military leader, I guess. He exerted himself also to increase the miserable salaries of the clergymen in the colony. Bishop O'Donnell and all who came in contact with the Admiral pay a warm tribute to his fine character. It was very fortunate for our island that in such a troubling time, such as the Irish Rebellion, the conspiracy in St. John's, the one where they wanted to kill us all, and the mutiny of the Latona, that the government was in the hands of a ruler at once so benevolent, so just, and above all, so courageous. So that's nice to hear a little bit of good news. And we have here the opening years of the present century, the 1800s, that is. Being that this book was written in 1895, take a drink, my friends. Present century, they were peaceful and uneventful for our island colony. The fisheries were successful, the country prosperous. After the dangerous conspiracy of the United Irishmen had been put down with a strong hand, and the mutiny on board the Latonia quelled by the firmness and severity of Waldegrave, the magistrates report to the new governor for the 1800, Vice Admiral Charles Maurice Pole. That peace and good order prevailed both in the city and the colonies. So now we're past him. We're on to Governor Pole now. Next year, there was neither governor nor chief justice. Admiral Pole never returned to the colony, and poor Ruth was drowned in the passage home in November. Newfoundland, however, does not appear to have felt their loss. So we did fine for a year without him, I guess. Later on, at the end of the summer, Dr. J. Ogden was made acting Chief Justice and Captain Robert Barton of the HMS La Concorde Lieutenant Governor. And that is where I'm going to leave you guys for today. We're at the beginning of the 1800s. We're nearing the end of the reign of King George III. I think the French have stopped fucking around with us now. It was their last attack. We moved through that. I feel like we moved quickly through this, but there was a lot on the go. I tell you, it was a lot fucking easier to read than last night's bit of information I had to digest. So that's cool. We've done a little bit. We're moving into the 1800s, which means I've got 300 pages of just the 1800s I get to read and learn about. Very, very, very cool. Anyway, guys, thank you for continuing to watch. As always, you can find me on Instagram at @slackofalltrades, on Facebook at Liam Small Does Comedy. Guys, this has been episode 20 of a history, I'm forgetting the name of this whole thing. Liam Small, Abridges, A History of Newfoundland by D.W. Prowse, 15 to 20 pages a day, every day, or until the bars reopen. Thank you guys so much. Keep it going. I'm starting to lose my fucking mind here in this house. I hope you guys are doing okay with your loved ones. I know we're all running out of Netflix, but I don't know if anybody knows any good podcasts or something they can recommend to me. That would be super deadly. Finger guns. Okay, guys, thank you so much. I'll see you tomorrow.